Belarus. You're all very welcome here this evening, and it's absolutely wonderful to have Andrey Kurkov here. He gave a fascinating presentation down at the Literature Festival event, and it's even better that he's come up here to talk to this small audience here today. An added bonus, by the way, is that his publisher told me that some of his family would be with him, and of course, being a not very intelligent person, said, oh, that probably maybe his wife or his son or something is travelling with him. But actually, we have family members who are now living in Mallow. So a very special Irish welcome to the extended Kurkov family, who have come, some from Kiev and some from Mallow. I should mention Teresa Carney at the club here, the chair, and Willie. I approached them about this idea and they supported it. I'd like to thank Philip and Catherine for their efforts in actually putting it together. For the Sasha DeBull, the literature programmer in the International Literature Festival, and I'd also mention Myrto, who's Andrey's publisher in Kurkov's books. She did a wonderful job. Just against the backdrop, very, very interesting. I was reading the newspaper there over the weekend, and on the 18th of May, 80 years ago, that was the first day that the Soviets started deporting people from Crimea, Tartars from Crimea in 1944. 200,000 people, young people, mostly young people, children, elderly people and women. 40 of them died during the deportations, and Crimea was reoccupied by the Russians in 2014, and the whole process of repression started again. We have a full-scale invasion of Russia, which got going on the 24th of February 2022, and there's an unbroken thread between what happened back in 1944 and before that and what's happening today. Another horrible statistic. There are thousands of Ukrainian children who have effectively been kidnapped by the Russians, and I won't go into the details, but it's so bad that the International Criminal Court have a warrant out for Vladimir Putin for this crime. It's the Ukrainian Human Rights Ombudsman in October 2022 reckoned that 260,000 children were taken, forcibly taken to Ukrainian children taken to Russia. So the numbers are vast. I should mention as well, a wonderful Ukrainian writer, Victoria Amelina, who has strong links with Ireland. This unfortunate lady, she was here for an Irish Pen event in October 2022, and she was involved in an event in Vicar Street in April of last year. I had the privilege of seeing her. She was murdered in a missile strike in a restaurant in Kramatorsk last June at the age of 37. Paul Muldoon, he commenting on that horrible crime, said this was a civilian target and represents a war crime, so we should remember her tonight. Next, an introduction to our guest, Andrey Kurkov. Andrey is a distinguished author, journalist, and former president of PEN Ukraine. He was longlisted for the International Booker Prize in 2024 for his latest novel, The Silver Bone, and in 2023 for Jim Hendricks' Live in Lviv. A graduate of the Kiev Foreign Languages Institute, and we'll see that in a minute because he's so good in English, and he's actually fluent in German and fluent in French, so it's definitely his native tongue. He became a pioneer of self-publishing after hundreds of rejections by publishers. His critically acclaimed novel, Death and Penguin, became an international bestseller. Other major works include his novel, Bigfoot Views, and his work of reported Ukrainian diaries, Dispatches from Kiev. Andrey was awarded the 2022 Prix Médicis Étranger and the inaugural Greg Barrios Book and Translation Prize from the National Books Critic for his novel, Grey Bees. The late Victoria Amelina interrupted her career as a novelist to systematically document human rights abuses by the invaders. Andrey has similarly interrupted his career as a novelist to use his talent to tell the outside world what is going on in Ukraine. His 2023 Diary of an Invasion is a collection of his writings and broadcast from Kiev, and it's a remarkable record of a brilliant writer who's at the forefront of a 21st century war. Living in Ukraine with his English wife and their 3 children, he's become a respected commentator in the international media of the Russian full-scale invasion. This evening he's going to talk to us about its impact on Ukraine's artistic, community and cultural life. So I hand over to Andrey.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Oh, now it works.
Yes.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much for organizing this small do. I don't want to take too much of your attention, but I think the aspect of culture and people of culture during the war is very important, because culture, as I said 1 hour ago, is part of national identity of every nation. I mean, national identity is made of culture, language and history. And on 24th of February 2022, practically when the war started, when Russians started shelling all of Ukraine, the culture disappeared, because I mean, you don't think about culture when you are shot at. And I remember on the second day of the invasion, we left Kyiv with my wife to go to Western Ukraine, because our children and their friends were in Lviv, and we wanted to pick them up, and we were stuck in the first traffic jam next to Bucha, and we were listening to the explosions of the artillery, and half of the country was on the run, and there is only one main road to west, so you can imagine that the traffic jams were 70-50 kilometers long, and some people were at the wheel for 2 days. I mean, on the first day, actually, I was 22 hours at the wheel, which didn't mean that we got somewhere. I was just standing in one traffic jam and then driving longer. And the whole artistic community left Kyiv and established Lviv, one of the most beautiful cities in Kyiv, as the cultural capital. Lviv was always considered cultural capital, but at that time, all pen club board moved to Lviv. And actually, of course, publishing houses stopped working. All the shops, bookshops were closed down. Libraries were shot at, and actually by today we have about 500 destroyed libraries in Ukraine. But the most significant thing is that actually writers stopped writing. And many writers volunteered and became soldiers. And by today we have about 40 writers and poets killed, some killed on the front line and some killed by Russians just when towns or cities were occupied. One writer, Volodymyr Vakulenko, who lived near Kharkiv with his autist son, he was detained by Russians and executed, and later found in an unnamed grave, and it took 8 months to actually to do the tests, DNA tests, to be sure that it was his body. And before, Victoria Amelina, a friend and colleague of mine, was mentioned. She was documenting the crimes, and she was looking for Volodymyr, because everybody hoped that actually he was arrested and taken to Russia and he's still alive. Before he was detained, actually, he hid his diary under the tree in the garden of his parents. And she found this diary, and she managed to prepare it for publication because before she was killed herself by the missile. In the first days of the invasion, when Russian army entered from Belarus through Chernobyl zone and occupied towns near Kyiv, Bucha, Vorza, Irpin, one of the first victims of Russians was Alexander Kisluk, Professor Kisluk, who was a professor of ancient Greek and who was the translator of Aristotle in Ukrainian. And he was killed actually on the steps of his house in Bucha. So we don't yet know the whole effect of this war on culture, but we have hundreds of people from all spheres of culture, cinematographers, not only Ukrainian cinematographers killed by Russia. One of the best documentary makers from Lithuania, he was filming Kvedraučius, he was filming documentary in Mariupol during the war, and he was killed by Russian soldiers while making film. So his film is called Mariupolis. It remained unfinished, but it was released. And now one of the most acclaimed Ukrainian documentaries out in cinemas, which is called 20 Days in Mariupol. And it is the first Ukrainian Oscar from American Academy of Cinema for this film. For first 2 months, actually, there was no cultural life in Ukraine. But slowly, starting from April, Ukrainian writers and musicians started to organize book launches, philosophical debates, and even film screenings in the underground stations and in the shelters. And the most famous Ukrainian poet and writer, Serhiy Zhadan, who lives in Kharkiv, the town, the city where now 800 people live, and where everyone, every day people are killed because it is 30 kilometers from the Russian border. But this city is even now quite vibrant and has literary festival, musical festival, jazz festivals, and new bookshops opening. Last year in Kiev alone, 12 new bookshops opened, which means actually that people actually came back to reading. And they read not what they read before the war, because in the first year of the war, soldiers were asking their friends and relatives to send them non-fiction books on Ukrainian history. Because in fact, not every Ukrainian knows Ukrainian history. The history was hidden because of the ideology, but in the Soviet time. We were not taught, we were not told about artificial famine, Holodomor. We were not told about deportations. There were lots of things which are becoming known only now. And the main thing for me, the most dramatic actually, Ukrainians didn't know hundreds of names of Ukrainian writers and poets who were killed by Stalin in 1936, 37, 38. And this group of people of culture, we are talking about several hundred people. I mean, they were exterminated, and they were called now the executed Renaissance. And these previously unknown writers and poets are becoming known and very much read now. So actually Ukrainians are rediscovering their culture, their literature, and everything which was destroyed either by Russian Tsars or by the Soviet regime. Putin said recently that Ukraine was invented by Lenin. Before that, he was talking as not only him, but I mean there were, I would say, regular talks about Ukraine being invented by German Secret Service in 1918. So, I mean, if you go into non-fiction books, you can find lots of interesting facts, but the fact is that in 1709, Peter the Great was fighting against Ukrainian army near Poltava. And this battle is called Poltava Battle. It became part of literature, Russian literature, Ukrainian literature. So Ukraine existed in 1709, but in fact Ukraine existed long before. And I just want to give you an example, mention one man who is still very little known in Ukraine, but who was one of the first Ukrainian writers, and he wrote in Latin, and he published his first book in 1484 in Rome. Why was he in Rome? Because he was the president of Bologna University. He actually, his real name is Yuri Donat Kotermak. He was born in Drogobych near Lviv, Western Ukraine. He got his education from Jagiellon University in Krakow, in Poland. And in Krakow he was known as Yuri from Drogobych. When he went to Bologna, where he was teaching, he got a name Giorgio da Leopoli, Giorgio from Lviv. And he was writing and publishing astrological economical prognosis for noble families, for the whole towns and for some countries. And in 1484, it was actually, he published astrological economical prognosis for Rome. And later writers in Ukraine, they wrote in several languages, including Polish. The first Ukrainian book in Polish was published in 1610 and was written by Mileti Smotritsky, one of Ukrainian philosophers. So Ukraine has very deep and long European history. What will happen after the war with Ukrainian culture is a big question, because from 2014 we have hundreds of books about the war, and we don't have enough love stories, crime stories, and mainstream literature. So today, poetry is more important for Ukrainians than fiction, and non-fiction is also more important than ordinary novels. And Victoria Melina and other poets in Ukraine, from Pen, Ukraine, they were traveling from the beginning of the war, from June, to the front lines to organize poetical readings for soldiers. And I witnessed how important it was for the soldiers, because poetry gives immediate emotional charge. So we have, in a way, very, I would say, unsophisticated, straightforward poetry, which is written in the most difficult times in every country. My fear is that after the end of the war, for 10 years, we will have fiction about the war. Because the war will stay in our minds, of course, in biography, but it will be difficult to switch your thoughts back to normal, peaceful times thoughts. And as a person who was born in 1961, I remember that we were told in the school and later in university to read only books about the war, because they were used in patriotic upbringing. I hope it will not happen in Ukraine, but I just think that there are some mechanisms which are working independently in every society, which suffers the aggression. And otherwise, I'm sure that Ukrainian literature is much more interesting now than Russian literature, because Russian literature is on the run. So those writers who remained in Russia, they are writing patriotic pro-Putin fiction. They accept censorship and self-censorship, and when you accept self-censorship, you will never achieve any good result. And the effect is that there is a very few books are now translated from contemporary Russian literature, whereas from Ukrainian literature you have dozens and dozens of books, of new books in German translation, in English, in French. Ukrainians actually never suffered from censorship from 1991. And even now, during the war, it would be logical to have military censorship, but we don't have. Probably journalists sometimes cannot get information which is concerned secret or wartime information, but the artistic community is free and is not told what to write about and what not to write about. So, I mean, I'm a pathological optimist. I suffered because of this, because I like to write dramatic stuff, dramatic stories. And many years ago, 40 years ago, I invented some kind of ceremony, not ceremony, but I used depressive classical music to lower down my optimism, in order to write dramatic stories. I don't listen to depressive music anymore, because I mean, I read the news. But I'm very hopeful that Ukraine will withstand, and the best proof of it is that in the beginning of the war, hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians volunteered to the front line, even without weapon. Because at stake, it was statehood of Ukraine. And for Ukrainians, as I said again, freedom is more important than stability and then the money. Because if you are not free, you become a slave. You can become a slave physically or ideologically. And Ukraine is a country with more than 400 political parties. So the country of individualists who cannot be told what to do and what not to do. So, I mean, for Ukrainians, dictatorship or any authoritarian regime is not acceptable. That's why we had Orange Revolution in 2004-05, and we had Euromaidan in 2013-14. And because of this, we have now this war. And I do hope that this will be the last war Ukraine will be involved. Yes.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful